We are looking tonight at a psalm of sunshine and shade. It's one of those times, as I was looking at this psalm this past week, I actually used this psalm as my own personal morning devotional several days this past week, reading through it, praying it back to God, a lot of things like that. And I, in a sense, kept asking myself, why haven't I preached this before? It's such a good psalm. It's such a realistic psalm. And I wonder sometimes if David's life, or any of the psalm writers from the human perspective, if they had not had the difficulties, the heartbreak, the heartaches that they experienced, that then filter through the inspiration of the psalm, so many of them, what would they look like? What would our psalm book, the ancient hymn book of the Jews, what would it look like, hypothetically, if, let's say, David's life had been this hunky-dory, easygoing life? Well, to say the least, it would look very, very different. Do any of you like particle board? You don't have to raise your hand. People might not like you or judge you for it, but okay, there we go. All right. I don't like particle board. I'll tell you this. I like the cost, okay? Yeah, you get a cheap piece of furniture or a cheap desk, but like a lot of things we say, you get what you pay for, okay? The big problem for me is that it's unstable, to put it in one word. It's not very strong or reliable. So which would you rather have tonight? Something made out of particle board, even some other things that are a little better, like the MFG, I think that's right, or plywood. I mean, those are better, right? But would you rather have, let's say, particle board or actual wood? Can I say that? Actual wood, like solid hardwood. Which would you rather have tonight? I don't have to really ask that, do I? Who would pick particle board over solid wood? Unless you're having to pay for it. If you're not having to pay for it, you're definitely picking hardwood. Right? Okay, that's question number one. Did you see you got 3 questions? The next 2 are a little more personal. What is your greatest fear? And we're afraid of a lot of things. From an early age, we tend to be afraid of the dark. We're afraid of the unknown. Sometimes we might pick something that is terrible over just the unknown. Like the old thing where you've got 3 doors and you know what 2 of them are, and it's just horrific things that you can see ahead of time. The other door, you can't, you just have to pick it, and then you get to see and experience whatever's inside. We're afraid of the future. We're afraid of war. Afraid of the economy. We're afraid of losing our liberties. We're afraid of losing our health, losing a loved one. And then we go through experiences like that, and we're afraid, and we're grieving, we're troubled, disturbed, we hurt mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. What is your greatest fear tonight? But then, another other one. On the other side, what is your greatest desire? What do you want more than anything in the universe? What do you really want tonight? Let's take a look at Psalm 27. One thing. 27th Psalm. As we do so, the first thing we notice in this psalm is trust. Trust. The first 6 verses, I don't have it outlined that way out beside it or anything, but if you wanted to add 27, 1 through 6 out beside the word trust on your copy of the handout, that would be might be helpful in seeing the big picture or the outline of this psalm that I have for us tonight. Although it's pretty straightforward, I believe. But Psalm 27, 1 through 6, is all about David's or the psalmist's confidence, his trust in God. And if that's all we had, going back in some ways to the earlier question about what would it be like if David's life was easy, 1 through 6 is not easy. I mean, there's enemies that want to eat you up. There's problems, but 1 through 6, you could read 1 through 6, not break a sweat, emotionally. It's very upbeat. If it's music, it's on an upbeat. It's bright. It's trust. Let's read 1 through 6 on that note. The first verse is the quotable part of Psalm 27, verse 1. You might have seen it on a refrigerator. You might have it memorized. You might have seen it. But it's a question in 2 questions. But like much of the Psalms, there is a parallel here. So it's really one question or a question that is just formatted for us in this poetic way. Psalm 27, verse 1, a question. It's going to show up. There we go. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold. Even the English text here has a footnote for refuge. Refuge of my life. So he's my light. Consider tonight how important light is. Consider even how important it was for the ancients. We take light for granted. We've got plenty of lights in here tonight, and I know sometimes that can be problematic. Kathy was mentioning this morning how certain lights affect her headaches and things. But we take it for granted. You get a good ice storm, and then your electricity and your lights and all of that, well, then you realize maybe I shouldn't have taken it for granted. But the ancients, they had the sun during the day, and about all they usually had were lamps at night, oil lamps that really aren't that great. David says, the Lord, God, is my light. He's my strength. He's my shelter. Gary and I communicated a bit about this morning's sermon, but I at least did not connect with him about tonight. But when he led that first song, and I saw some of those opening lines about the storm, his love staying with us, that abiding love, I thought, yeah, that's Psalm 27. The shelter in the storm. We have a song about that too. All right, I better be quiet and read the verse. The Lord is the stronghold of my life. And then the same question of whom shall I be afraid? David's laying it out. He says, if this is the case, if God, and he's saying he is, if God is all of this for me, for my life, we could say, what should I be afraid of? It reminds me of some other passages, and I'm not going to all mention all of them, but I think about Paul in Romans 8 when he's describing what we have in Jesus that David was looking forward to, the Messiah. And he says, because of Jesus, if God be for us, what? Who can be against us? Romans 8, verse 31. Or Hebrews chapter 13, 5 and 6, where there's another psalm that's quoted there about God never leaving or forsaking us. What should I be afraid of? We listed them tonight, and we could make that list longer and more personal to us. We could have a survey tonight and say, what are you afraid of? What could you be afraid of? What are you afraid of? And then we could just read Psalm 27:1 and ask a question. If I'm with God tonight, do I really need to be afraid? And then these we're putting into 2 questions become even more as we keep reading. He adds to them. And 2 through 3, or 2 and 3, I think he tends to focus in on that first one, that the Lord is my light and my salvation. Let's read those. Verse 2, when enemies assail me to eat up my flesh. I don't know if that's just poetry or if he's been dealing with some people that, all right, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though, verse 3, an army encamp against me. When I read this past week, I thought about Ukraine. Regardless of where you are on some of the specifics and the politics and the money and the oil and all that, I think about a nation being invaded. I think about here David, the way that he writes it, and again, how literal this is, okay, but it's like he's the one guy on the other army. He's the lone soldier, and the whole army's around him. Is this Saul chasing David? I don't know. The whole army's against him. And then he says this, my heart shall not fear. Remember the question. The war arise against me, yet I will be confident. How can he be confident in a circumstance like that, where there's an army amassed against him, and that army doesn't have to be at all literal. It might be just a whole mass of problems, whether they're financial or medical or family relationships, whatever it is. You ever felt like that? I think you have. If you lived long at all, where it feels like I'm surrounded. I can't get away from it. David says, even if that's what happens, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to be confident. And it could even be translated as in this, whether that's going back to 1 and 1 or that's going forward to 4 we're about to see, or both. It says, in this reality, in this, that I have confidence in God, not in self. I won't be afraid. Because God is there, the light to guide, to dispel the darkness, and the strength to hold me up. And then in 4 through 6, as he trusts God, he looks at God as his stronghold. Our title tonight is taken from verse 4. And although verse 1 is the quotable quote, if I had to pick a refrigerator verse from Psalm 27, I might pick verse 4. If I had to pick a verse in the Bible as a mission statement for my life, for our lives, and there's several of those we could pick in the Bible, but verse 4 would be in the running for me. Well, let's read it. Psalm 27, 4 through 6. The Lord, he says, is my stronghold. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after. Here's my deepest, greatest, strongest desire. I suggest tonight it is that desire, strongest, deepest, greatest, for every human being. The difference is that David is aware of it. That's what I want, and I'm going to seek after it. Here it is. That I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire, or to meditate, to just stand there or fall there in awe, to inquire in his temple. At first glance, you might think this is the tabernacle, or looking forward to what his son will build, the temple. And although there's something to that here, I don't know that that's really what David has in mind. And I don't know that David is looking per se to what we would think of as being with God in heaven one day. I think that's a part of it too, but it's almost more, even now, this temple or this shelter is something he can experience daily in his life as he communes with God, as he gets to know God. I wonder sometimes when we come to Bible classes or go to Bible studies, I wonder, are we learning about God? I might add the word just there. Are we just learning about God? Or are we out of this desire, are we learning who God is? Are we learning to trust him? Are we learning to know him in a personal way? Well, that's David. 5 and 6. So I think part of the stronghold, part of the rescue from the storms, is this, verse 4. They're not different ideas. It's part of why that is the case is that my communion with God, my heart's desire to see him. 5, he says, 4. He will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. There it's creeping back in, the difficulty, but he's going to hide me. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Verse 6 continues the same feeling. Now my head shall be lifted up. Is your head lifted up tonight, or is it more down? My head will be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent. There's the tabernacle, but again, I think there's more to it than just that. Sacrifices with shouts of joy. Keep in mind that David was not a priest, and so some of this, even in a very literal way, doesn't work out so well if it's the temple or the tabernacle. Then he says finally, I will sing and make melody to the Lord. This is what happens when we are people today who trust God, who look at our problems, and instead of focusing on them and meditating on them, we are able to see through the fog of difficulty and gaze on the glory and beauty of a God who transcends them. Doesn't mean we'd ignore our problems. I don't think David's doing that at all, is he? But we don't obsess over them, or at least David doesn't. We should. But this is the happy part. Isn't that what I said? Trouble's here. Enemy is here. People that want to eat you up. But David says, I'm not going to be afraid of them. It's not going to work. Because I'm with God. The one thing I want is to be with him, to see him. But then, it's almost like if you look at verse 6, like there should be some more space there. That you need to hit the space bar a few more times. Because something dramatic happens between verse 6 and 7. The contrast is so stark that some people have questioned whether this is the same author, that David didn't write one of these parts. Now, I don't think that at all, but it just is an example of how this transition is so big. And it reminds me, just that alone reminds me that you can be at this mountaintop part of life, and we need to be careful. That it's easy, we talked about taking things for granted. It's easy when things are going well, everybody likes you, and it's smooth sailing. It's easy to get comfortable. It's easy to just assume without even maybe thinking about it at all. Or if you do think about it, it's easy to conclude that things are just going to continue to be as they are. And that may or may not be the case. In verse 7, through the end of the psalm, there's trouble. That's your word there, trouble. Now we saw trouble. The word was even in the text in 1 through 6. But now things shift. And it is not that the God of David has changed. It is not that David has changed. But something is different here. The angle, the perspective is different. But still the same. Let's read it. 7 through 10. I call his cry. His cry. I know cry and plea are very similar. We just skipped ahead there, but there's a bit of nuance here. Let's read 7 through 10. He says, "Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud." When he writes, cry aloud, that means this is not just some emotional stress where you might feel that way on the inside, but nobody really knows. It's not a few tears, just a couple of trickles. It's more like a wail. Okay. It's more like where you hit the ground and all you can do is just cry. Just hear my cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, I do seek, or do I seek? I think of how Jesus comes into this story. And Now the idea of seeing God face to face becomes less poetic in a way. But Jesus. And we've got passages about that. We've got songs about that. Face to face. What will it be? But David, in the midst of his trouble and his cry of pain, it's almost like another transition, another jump. Verse 7 is the jump to pain. Verse 8 is, now he's talking about, well, God, you told me to seek your face. Well, now in my pain, it's almost as if the pain is driving him closer to God. He's waking up and says, okay, you told me to seek you. That's what I'm doing in my trouble. Help me. Hear me. Listen. As we noted this morning from Acts 17, God is not asking for our help. God is the one who's giving us the help. And so that's very clear here. Verse 9. He then says, hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger. He's feeling, the emotion seems to be that maybe God's upset. Maybe that's why I'm hurting. Maybe that's why he's not here and hearing and listening. That's why I'm having trouble getting through. Maybe I've done something to anger him. He says, don't be angry. Oh, you have been my help. He thinks back. You've been there for me. Cast me not off. Forsake me not. Don't leave me. And then he preaches to himself. He says, oh God of my salvation. And that's where we started, isn't it? Verse 1. He is my light and my salvation. Of whom shall I be afraid? And now he's crying out loud as he weeps and mourns and laments. He says, I'm trying to get to you. Don't leave. And then verse 10. He says, for my father and my mother have forsaken me. But. And this is where I think now he's getting back to reality. He's calming some of the emotions. He says, but. Verse 10. But the Lord. Take me in. If this is David as the human author, there's some things that are mysterious about David's parents. We do know that he finds some refuge for them in Moab when he is running from Saul. And he leaves them in Moab, and that's all we know. Did they die in Moab? Did Saul kill them? Did the king of Moab kill them? I don't know. Did they later disown their son? What does he mean by forsaken? Is it just a figure of speech? Is he just saying that's how it feels? It's just like the people that I should depend on, nobody's there for me. Even my parents have deserted me. Is it that they've died? Is that what he means? You can look at it that way, that everybody in our life will either betray us or die. We don't die first, right? Who can you really depend on in that absolute way? It doesn't matter. The one who doesn't get sick, the one that doesn't, his car doesn't break down on the way to help you, none of that. The one that will always be there to hear the cry. Then he makes his plea. 11 and 12. He makes this request of God. And I think it's strange. What did it take for David in this moment to ask God to teach him? Verse 11, teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries. That's also part of his request. For false witnesses have risen against me. So his parents have forsaken him. Now they're lying. Other people are lying about him. False witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out. Gotta love this poetry. They breathe out violence. That's their breath. Whether he's talking about actual words or it's something more metaphoric than that. That's where I am. But the first part of the plea is, I want to learn more. Could there be something in there for us? A little tip there that in the moment of trial, in the moment of difficulty, as you trust God, put the words together, in your trouble, as you surrender everything to God, what better time to ask God and to seek to know more about God? What better time to grow as a child of God than when it feels like everybody and everything is falling down around you? That's what David does. I want to know more, even in my trouble. Then you get his outlook. See his cry, his plea, and then the outlook. Here's how the psalm wraps up. Psalm 27. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay. Psalm 27, 13 and 14. He says, I believe. Here's what he knows. We've seen some things that he feels. Here's what he knows, what he believes. He's convicted. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait. And when I first read this, I thought this was more, now he's preaching to the reader, but I think he might still be preaching to himself. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. And he's using two words here, strong and courage. They're not the same word, but they are synonyms. Both have to do with mental stability and courage. Being able to stand against all of the trouble and things that do come and will come. That a trust-filled life is not a trouble-free life. And so he says, be strong, be courageous, take heart. Wait for the Lord. The waiting game, there's no cute way to put it other than maybe to say it's not fun. Whether you're waiting for test results, you're waiting for the procedure, they don't schedule those right away. Maybe if it's an emergency surgery, okay, but or it's after the treatment or after the surgery and you're waiting in recovery. You're waiting to, when is it going to be when I can get back to where I was? But time and time again, we are encouraged to wait, to learn. We said it's a game, but you really have to have skill. It's like a skill, a life skill set. Learn the art of waiting. And what waiting looks like biblically is not impatient waiting where, yeah, I got to wait, okay. Or waiting and complaining while I wait. How much longer? Even though that may happen. That's not the ideal picture. The ideal picture is I'm going to calm my heart. I'm going to have courage to face the day with a head held high because of the question. If what verse 1 says is true for my life, what do I have to be afraid of? Like the old quote, courage is not a lack of fear. It's not a total absence of fear. I think it's the John Wayne quote, right? It means you're afraid, but you saddle up anyway. That's the kind of waiting in Psalm 27, verse 14. And if you trust God, you'll wait on Him. You'll wait on His timing. Because if I trust somebody, I'll wait. I'll do it. It is told that August Toplady, what a name. Did you realize that's the guy who wrote Rock of Ages? August Toplady. Earlier, Rose saw that, and she was looking over. She likes to check out my notes and things, and she's like, why do you have August down here? Here's what he wrote. It is told that he was off the shore of England trying to get some type of shelter. And so he wrote, Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy wounded side which flowed be of sin the double cure. Save from wrath and make me pure. Not the labors of my hands can fulfill thy law's demands. Could my zeal no respite know? Could my tears forever flow? All for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. And then nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling. Naked, come to thee for dress, helpless, look to thee for grace. Foul, I fly to the mountain, or to the mountain fly. Wash me, Savior, or I die. Last verse. While I draw this fleeting breath, when mine eyes shall close in death, when I soar to worlds unknown, see thee on thy judgment throne, Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. I think we could also say that August Toplady, it might be unrealistic, but in the middle of that storm on that boat, you might have just dropped down a copy of Psalm 27. I haven't forgotten, have you? Maybe you're not thinking this, but I'm thinking, what does particle board have to do with Psalm 27? Anybody got that? We said particle board is unstable. I think about times when I have had screws pull out and it just, it takes a big clump with it. And you try to repair it and it doesn't work so well. You put the screw in and it just, even as it starts to go in, it crumples. And if it's older, it's even worse. It's decayed. The chemicals, the formaldehyde has broken or started to break down, and it's just not a good idea. It's a bad day, at least in that moment. But you put a screw into some nice pine or spruce. Yeah, they might charge you an arm and a leg for it right now, but it'll lock in. You can sink those screws up. And I don't know about you, but there's hardly a better feeling than you drill that screw in and it sinks up into the wood. I think of that. And I can't at all take credit for this. I heard this. I don't know who it was, so I can't give name credit even if I wanted to. I might, but so I'm stealing somebody's idea. But you can think about Psalm 27 as describing us like wood. And we might at times look good on the outside. I mean, particle board looks pretty nice. You shine it up and all and have a nice pattern to it. The outside looks great. But you stick a screw to it. When the trouble and the pain invades the particle board, it crumples. But if you have something that is solid on the inside, like a human heart that trusts in a God who can do anything and everything, you've got something. Because a life like this, it's not easy. Doesn't mean the screws don't hurt. Doesn't mean they don't leave their damage and they don't cause emptiness and grief. But if I'm like David tonight, take all of them that come, the worst, whatever, I can hold up. I can be solid. More than just hold up. I can be confident. Because of my God. Let's stand and sing together.